Dushanbe, capital city of Tajikistan, is in the spotlight when Chinese Premier Li Keqiang makes an official visit to the country and attends the 17th meeting of the Council of Heads of Government of the member states of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. The meeting is aimed to carry out the tasks set by the SCO Heads of States meeting in June. Moreover, strengthening China-Tajikistan bonds is on the agenda. So what will be the future priorities of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization? How will challenges be overcome and goals reached with multilateral cooperation, and will the SCO become a more influential strategic balancing power in Eurasia? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Mr. Cui Hongjian from the China Institute of International Studies and Mr. Einar Tangen, current affairs commentator. We'll also talk to our correspondent Michal Bardavid in Dushanbe, capital of Tajikistan, and Mr. Viktor Olovich, political analyst and lead expert at the Center for Actual Politics in Moscow via satellite. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Pandong, but before we get started, let's take a look at this.
Strengthening cooperation under the framework of the SCO. Premier Li Keqiang's first in-office visit to Tajikistan brings with it a pledge to implement agreements reached in June at the meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. The Qingdao SCO summit mapped out the course for the future development via the Qingdao Declaration and 23 signed cooperation documents.
青岛峰会呢，现在宣言里头呢，把这个构建新型国际关系。
The Qingdao Declaration highlights the construction of a new type of international relations and the building of a common community with a shared future for mankind. I believe during the SCO meeting in Tajikistan, leaders will further implement the outcomes of the Qingdao summit.
In 17 years of consistent growth, the SCO now accounts for 20% of the world's economy and 40% of its population. It has become the world's largest comprehensive regional organization, covering the largest area and population in the world. Amid global uncertainties and rising unilateralism and protectionism, experts say international and regional organizations like the SCO mechanism have become the anchors of stability, playing roles of world peacemaker, global development contributor, and defender of the international order.
在青岛峰会的时候呢，习近平主席呢。
During the SCO Qingdao Summit, President Xi Jinping pointed out the developmental direction of the SCO under the guidance of the Shanghai spirit. He said SCO member states have deepened mutual trust and friendly relations, consolidated regional security and stability, promoted common development, and forged a constructive partnership. There are no alliances nor confrontations, and no targeting any third party. There will be more cooperation in areas of trade and finance, political security, as well as people-to-people and cultural exchanges.
And I'd like to start with ties between China and Tajikistan. Mr. Cui, we know that the two countries lifted their bilateral ties to a comprehensive strategic partnership last year. So what do you make of the real progress made in the past year?
Yes, as we know, Tajikistan is one of the very close neighboring states for China. So I think it's very important for both two countries to take the relations with each other. Yes, since a comprehensive strategic partnership established in last year, I think now it's a very good time, especially by Premier Li's visit to this country to promote some, I think, very, very concrete cooperation. Also, now, because Tajikistan still a very, undeveloping countries, so now it has a very ambitious strategy to have some more industrialization. So I think now it's very good time for China to provide more assistance to get some more cooperation. For example, how could China do some more investment to promote the infrastructure in Tajikistan? And how could China and Tajikistan do something together in manufacturing and agriculture and some other? So I think at this time, especially more concrete and more, very, very useful cooperation in some specific fields will be expected.
And that leads us right into the economic potential in this bilateral relationship. Mr. Tangen, China is currently the largest source of Tajikistan's foreign investment and the country's third largest trading partner. So having said that, as Mr. Cui just mentioned, the two countries are in very different economic status.
Right.
So what do you make of the potential there in the near future?
Well, they certainly needed the help. After they had the fall of the Soviet Union, there was a war, civil war that raged on. We're talking about a country of less than 8 million people. It's the smallest country in the Stans area. They did about $800 million worth of trade with China last year, up 20%, almost 20%. So there are things that are happening. It's landlocked. About 75% of the exports are cotton. And about 54% of the arable land is used. That's probably they probably need to go up a step, and that's a perfect example of where if they were processing their cotton into fabrics and materials, this could provide a lot of jobs. And quite frankly, that whole industry is moving out of China simply because of wages. So there's an example of things. Having access to the markets not only in China, but also to Europe and the rest of the Stans would be very, very important to them. They still depend, about 40% of the GDP is on these remittances. A lot of these people are working abroad, and this is a very tough time with the difficulties in Russia with the sanctions going on. A lot of them are not, there's just not jobs available for them. So some of them are coming back. So they definitely need the economic stimulus, they need the connectivity, and they need to figure out how they're going to pay for it as well.
And for more on that, let's cross live to CGTN correspondent Mihal Bardavid in the Tajik capital, Dushanbe. Hello, Mihal. Earlier we were talking about infrastructure cooperation, manufacturing upgrading and industrialization plans. So give us some specific examples of Chinese-Tajik cooperation.
Well, what they're trying to do here really is create win-win situations. Now, Tajikistan was the first country to sign a memorandum of understanding with the Silk Road Economic Belt with China. And since then, within the scope of the Belt Road Initiative, China has really invested in Tajikistan. One key example is the Dushanbe 2 power plant, which Chinese company TBEA has built. And this company now provides about 60% of the capital's, Dushanbe's, electricity. So this is, of course, a very significant example for them. Another key example is with the construction and railways. One example for that is the railway and road of the Baktat-Yovan Railway, which connects the southern part of the country with the central part of the country. So these are all very significant. And when it comes to mechanisms, these are mostly provided by foreign direct investment from China to Tajikistan, but also some of the projects are created by loans that are provided by the Chinese government or Chinese banks. So all of them very significant. Tajikistan's top investor has become China as well on this side.
So you've been following this visit and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization heads of government meeting very closely. So when you talk to local people, what are the common conception of ties with China?
Well, in terms of the way that the people have been impacted by the cooperation between the two countries, we've really talked to a lot of people here on the streets in terms of investments and bilateral ties and how that has affected people here. One example was, for example, with the driver that we've been working with. He stated that the road that he's been taken, the route, has come down from 14 hours to 5 hours because of a tunnel that has been built by China. So that's very critical for him. Another example is heating. The power plant that we mentioned earlier, the Dushanbe 2, has really changed the situation here from the last 5 to 6 years. There were a lot of electricity power cuts being experienced in the country, and since then that has really stopped. They're now very happy to have constant electricity, constant power, and constant running water. So this has really made an impact on people's lives here. They've also been telling us that housing has also improved due to some cooperations, bilateral cooperation with China. Some of the housing, residential houses, have been developed with different infrastructure developments in terms of technologies, and this has really brought down the prices of houses to more affordable for people on the street here, which really has an impact on people's everyday lives. So that's why they're really able to feel the significance of bilateral ties.
How does Tajikistan view the role of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in Tajik politics and diplomacy?
Well, it's very clear that they find it to be very significant. Tajikistan's President Rahmon has stated that he considers the Shanghai Cooperation Organization one which is very influential and that it is gaining weight in a difficult geopolitical space. He's also emphasized that for Tajikistan, the SCO really meant opening up to new opportunities with different multilateral cooperation with different partners in areas that have been really very significant for the development of the country, for example, with security, with energy and construction. And during his statements in the summit in China, Qingdao, in June, that took place with the heads of state of the SCO, President Rahmon emphasized that the countries should be working together to ensure world peace and that they should be really joining efforts to create more stability, security and peace in the region. So it really shows how much of a significance he believes the SCO can have in the region.
Thank you very much. Our correspondent Mihal Badvid in Dushanbe. So, gentlemen, Mihal just mentioned some specific examples of China-Tajikistan cooperation, power plants, railways, tunnels, roads. Basically, it's about infrastructure and connectivity, and that's the core values of the Belt and Road Initiative. And actually, Tajikistan is the first country to sign a MOU on Belt and Road Initiative with China. So that leads to a specific question, Mr. Cui. How does the financing mechanism and cooperation mode work?
Yeah, I think that so far, as we know, firstly, regarding to the financial model or business model to drive this cooperation between two countries, I think so far many is a kind of a government-to-government cooperation. Also, you know, especially for Tajikistan situation, because at a very preliminary stage for industrialization. So I think so far from China's side, some state-owned companies and even some state-owned banks provided a lot of credit and also some assistance. I think it's very necessary, especially for Tajikistan's economy at this moment. But of course, I think gradually, maybe both two countries, we need to try to find out some new way, not only on a bilateral level and also from the SCO. As we know now, the SCO is talking about how could we build up a kind of a mechanism to get more financial support from market and from every member state.
And that's very interesting.
Yes.
Actually, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization started as a security organization, but over the decade it evolves from solely focusing on security and expands to many different arenas. So how would you say the SCO is positioning itself nowadays?
Yes, we can find out a kind of evolution of the SCO in its nature, in its even the goal. Also, you know, yes, you are right to mention at the beginning, the SCO was focusing on a security issue, because as we know, the original requirement for the organization is to deal with some very big problem of security, including terrorism and extremism and everything. But now I think once so far we have been keep a very good situation in security. So now I think it's a good time for SCO to have some more function to support the regional development. It has happened. I mean, for the last summit, or even this time, I mean, in Qingdao summit, we can find a very clear direction for SCO to have some more economic development function.
That's exactly right, because in the Qingdao Declaration, the major achievement of the Qingdao Summit, on top of the 10 major points, it's opposing fragmentation in world trade relations and any form of trade protectionism. So, and also the second is supporting the China International Import Expo, which is to be held in November 2018 in Shanghai, coming up very soon. So do you think that could be the theme of this time's SCO Heads of Governments meeting in Dushanbe, Mr. Tang?
Well, I agree with my colleague on this, but the morphing from security things is a realization that long-term security in the region depends on prosperity, the ability of people to have hope, have jobs, provide for the families. And I think this is the real subtext of what's going here. The the whole issue about unilateral actions, tariffs, all of this kind of trade war protectionism is anathema to any kind of regional cooperation. So within this, so what you see here is a big regional group who are saying, look, we have to solve our own problems. There are transportation issues. We have to look at our development not as country by country, but as a whole. We have to have the connectivity to connect up our markets so that we can create jobs and do trade. But I think the big change here that people should be paying attention to is the addition of India. Now you start looking at how many people are involved regionally, how this is going to affect. And India signs on this is very important. Russia has already made it clear that they want to talk about these unilateral sanctions that the U.S. has been imposing on them. And it wants to, within this group, say, listen, let's have a trade agreement that bypasses this, because you're not part of this unilateral action, and we don't like it, so therefore let us do what is necessary. And that could lead to an agreement between what was the Russian-backed Eurasian Economic Community and the Belt and Road Initiative. These are very big issues, not much press attention to them in the rest of the world. If you look around, there's a few pieces from India, obviously some of the stands, and from China. Nothing in the Western press, nothing.
But when geopolitics come into play, it could be a very delicate and subtle balancing game for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, right, Mr. Cui, because it positions itself as a regional bloc, focuses more on stability and maybe possible prosperity based on that kind of stability, right?
Yeah, of course. As we know, I think the major agenda so far for the international community is how could we deal with the relations between security and development. I think we can get something from the experience of SCO is, yes, the security and the regional peace would be always a priority for this organization. But at the same time, I think to on the basis of security, how could we do something more? Because once we have some more development, it will be good to deal with some issue of injustice and this imbalance between a poor country, rich country. Because still, I think, especially from China's perspective, and also it's shared by other member states of SCO, is once we could deal with a challenge from development, then we can find a very, very strong basis to support sustainable
because we're also dealing with the root causes of poverty, terror, instability, once for all, right?
Yes.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. We'll be continuing this right after this. You're watching Dialogue on CGTN. Stay with us. You're watching Dialogue on CGTN. For more on the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and its strategic position, let's talk to Mr. Viktor Olevich in Moscow. Mr. Olevich, how does Russia view the SCO and its own policy in the region? Will there be a contradiction, and will the SCO be a competitor to Russia's Eurasian strategy?
Well, of course, when the Shanghai Cooperation Organization was formed, Russia was more interested in the defense and security aspects of its functions, and China was more interested in the economic aspects. But as time passed and as the situation at the international stage changed and developed, these interests they actually became closer between China and Russia. So as my colleague in Beijing pointed out, the increasing sanctions against Russia from the United States and the introduction of sanctions against China by the United States in the last few weeks, in the last month, have actually increased interest in both capitals, including Moscow, in an economic alignment to counteract those American sanctions, because there is an understanding in both capitals that Washington intends on continuing with their policy of economic sanctions, not just against Russia, but also against China. And as far as the security issues in the region, especially in Central Asia, we have to remember the three main adversaries, so to say, of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in the security field, and that's terrorism, separatism, and extremism. And of course, the Central Asian states, the four Central Asian states are members, the founding members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. That's Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan. They all face, and especially Tajikistan, which is on the border, which shares a border with Afghanistan, they face a specific threat of terrorist infiltration and extremist organizations infiltrating from Afghanistan. Because in the last year, and especially in the last few months, we have seen a serious deterioration of the political and security situation in Afghanistan. We have seen a resurgence of Taliban. We have also seen increased activity by ISIS, by the so-called Islamic State organization, which is banned both in Russia and in China. And we have also seen some evidence as to the possibility that the American forces in Afghanistan and possibly some other members of the NATO contingent based in Afghanistan could use Afghanistan as a ground to train the Uyghur separatists, since Afghanistan also shares a small border with China. And so both China and Russia are very much interested in securing stability and security cooperation in Central Asia, both in Tajikistan and in other Central Asian states. And so this Prime Minister Summit in Dushanbe is an important step both in assuring and securing cooperation in the economic field and expanding cooperation in the economic field in Central Asia, expanding cooperation between China and Russia in that region, but also in the security field and taking those steps that are necessary to counteract the dangers coming from extremist organizations in Afghanistan. And it must also
Thank you very much, Mr.
Again,
Viktor Olevich in Moscow. So, gentlemen, Mr. Olevich just mentioned some hot-button issues in this particular part of the world. Actually, they were all covered by the SCO Summit Declaration. Back in June, the Korean Peninsula issue, Afghanistan, Iran nuclear deal, and the opposition against the use of chemical weapons. So the big question now is, what's the role of the SCO in all these hot-button issues? Is it a coordinator? Is it's a problem solver, or it's mainly a platform for relative sides to talk about these, Mr.
Yeah, I think now, as we know, SCO still, has a very big priority to have more security concern, especially not only in this region and also to other regions. Because if we understand how is this, relevant, between the regional security situation, we can understand naturally SCO every time it will show its very big concern on some regional issue, especially some hotspot issue, including the Korea Peninsula or some other. So I think, secondly, yes, I think now it's in a process for SCO to try to take some more responsibility in regional and global governance, not only in the security governance and also in the economic governance. So I think it's a very bigger requirement so far from international situation, because once SCO try to protect its prosperity, its peace, and I think it's good for it to look widely, especially the whole situation, the global situation, regional situation. I think it's very necessary for SCO to promote its views and its capability to try to be, a very, very, stable part for the international situation.
And talking about economic potential, I quite like your example from Tajikistan, the cotton story. There should be more added value to that, and this could be the part of the country's industrialization. Do you think it's a common story shared by all those Central Asian countries concerned?
Absolutely, and this is the main part of the Belt and Road that a lot of people don't understand, that China is promoting it by downstreaming industries which are no longer competitive being based in China, and that will have an add-on effect. And there's benefits to China, obviously, because with jobs, with disposable income, they're going to buy goods. The question is who they're going to buy goods from, the U.S., from Europe, or China. China still has a tremendous price advantage, 20 to 30% over these other things. But when you start talking about how this is coming together, I think the entrance of India and Russia and China, this is really about getting comfortable with spheres of influence, because there have been historical spheres of influence. India has brought them up. Obviously, Russia brought them up with their Eurasian Economic Community. This is a forum where they get comfortable with that and start actually doing something. And I think a lot of this is being pressed by actions in Washington, especially by Donald Trump. There's this feeling, I think, because of the financial meltdown in 2008 and 2009, the uncertainty created by Donald Trump, and now, these fluctuations in the market, people don't know exactly what they're doing. The confidence in the American system as a whole, and this could bleed over into the dollar, is let us say it's not going very well. And this has long-term economic consequences that a lot of these people are going to be very, very concerned about, because what do you do when the big players are out there and they're not playing by any particular rules? They're just, it's the jungle, law of the jungle. You tend to gather together with your neighbors and say, look, we need to build something that's stable for ourselves, regardless of what's happening outside.
And should be win-win.
It has to be win-win.
Yeah. And talking about that, this also raises some policy sensitivity there, because many would have this concept of that Belt and Road Initiative maybe is pushing by China solely, but actually it puts policy alignment and win-win cooperation as its core value, right, Mr. Xue?
Yeah, I think firstly we need to make clear that indeed this BRI, Belt and Road Initiative proposed by China, just like the Chinese government argued that yes, it's raised by China, but it would be shared by every partner. So I think secondly, we need to find out...
Does this also tell about China's role in the SCO as well?
Yes, I think that always if we look at this so-called Shanghai spirit for SCO and also some major principles for BRI, we can find very big similarities, which means that equal cooperation and win-win cooperation. I think that's very core principles for Chinese foreign policy, not only for BRI. And secondly, I think that we need to make clear what's maybe the role of the BRI in economic, also in geopolitical, like that. Frankly, I think that originally BRI is right for geo-economic initiative. But of course, we need to realize that perhaps it will have some geopolitical consequences. So I think now the big issue for BRI, for China, for all of the partners is how could we try to firstly reaffirm this very clear destination to have this geo-economic cooperation. At the same time, we need to take some more resources to have a very good management on any kind of geopolitical consequences.
Yes. I want to amplify something there. There's a real difference between the way that the SCO and these organizations, it's purely by consensus. China can't say, I want to put this to a vote, and if they have the most number of votes, they win. No, every single country in there has to say, yes, we go along with it. Very different from the UN and IMF models, where literally there's a vote, and if you're in the minority, well, who cares? So this is a different aspect that China is bringing to the table. It's a much more Eastern, and it reflects a profound cultural difference between East and West. And this is something that people in the West are going to have to get a handle on, because they're not used to that. Donald Trump would tell you, he says the winner takes it all, and I can grind somebody down.
Well, on this side of this, it's always win-win cooperation. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for input. And that's it for this edition of Dialogue on CGTN. I'm Han Jung in Beijing. Bye-bye.